Hello and welcome to Spine-Chilling Stories. If you drift off with these videos, show some love with a like and a subscribe. Also, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Now get cozy, relax, and let tonight's tale carry you away. Eliza Carrington signed the lease with shaking hands. The ink looked wet, like blood pooling at the bottom of the page, but when she blinked, it was just ink. The landlord, a narrow man with a face that seemed too long for his skull, slid the key across the counter. "Third floor, end of the hall," he said. "The walls are thin, so try to keep the noise down." Eliza nodded, though she didn't plan to make any noise. It had been a long 6 months since Daniel's death. 6 months of silence, of waking in the middle of the night expecting to hear his breathing, his laugh, his keys on the counter. When the real estate agent told her this building was old but quiet, she had felt something uncoil in her chest. Quiet sounded good. The building smelled faintly of damp plaster and old coffee. As she climbed the stairs, the light from the hallway bulbs flickered like they were struggling to stay alive. Apartment 3F waited at the end of the corridor, the brass numbers slightly crooked as if the door itself had once been hit. Inside, 1 bedroom, a kitchen, a small balcony overlooking the alley. The wallpaper was peeling, revealing the ghost of floral patterns beneath. She dropped her bag and exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. The first night, she barely slept. She could hear something faint through the wall. Not exactly voices, not music either. More like whispering. It wasn't words, not at first. Just the soft rhythm of someone breathing beside her ear. At 2:17 a.m., she sat up. "Hello?" The whispering stopped. Only the sound of the old refrigerator hummed through the dark. Morning came gray and heavy, the kind of light that made colors look washed out. Eliza made coffee and told herself she'd just imagined it. The whispering, the presence, the way her name had almost seemed to breathe itself into the night air. She unpacked boxes, hung a few photos, though she avoided looking too long at the one of Daniel. His smile looked forced now, almost like he knew what was coming. By late afternoon, rain began tapping against the windows. The building creaked, settling deeper into its own old bones. The pipes moaned every few minutes, like someone sighing behind the walls. She tried to read. The words swam. She switched to unpacking dishes instead. Somewhere behind the kitchen wall came a dull thud, then another, rhythmic, deliberate. Thud, thud, thud. "Hey!" she called, stepping closer. Are you fixing something?" No answer, but the sound stopped. She pressed her ear against the cold plaster. It was quiet for a long moment. Then, so faint she almost didn't hear it, a woman's voice whispered, "Don't let him in." Eliza jerked back. The mug she'd been holding fell and shattered across the tiles. Her heart beat so hard she could hear it in her ears. She waited, straining for another sound, but the wall was silent. Later, when she went downstairs to complain, the landlord just blinked slowly. He said, "There's no one next door. 3E's been empty since before I started managing the place." She laughed, a dry, nervous sound. "Empty? Then who?" He shrugged. "Old buildings make noise. You'll get used to it." That night she left the lamp on beside her bed. The rain hadn't stopped. It drummed a steady rhythm against the glass, soft and hypnotic. At some point she must have drifted off, because she woke to the sound of footsteps moving through her apartment. Slow, careful, barefoot steps. They stopped just outside her bedroom door. Then the whisper came again, closer now, breath brushing her ear. "He's already inside." Morning brought the kind of silence that felt staged, too still, too expectant. Eliza stood in her bedroom doorway, staring at the thin line of dust along the floorboards. If someone had walked there last night, there'd be footprints. There weren't any. She checked the windows. Locked. The door. Locked, chain still in place. But the coffee table had moved a few inches closer to the couch. She was sure of it. She told herself she might have nudged it yesterday while unpacking, though she couldn't picture doing so. She dressed and went out for a walk. The rain had stopped, but the world still smelled wet and iron-like. When she returned an hour later, she saw something new. A small, pale mark on the hallway wall opposite her door. Not paint, more like chalk. A rough circle with a crooked line cutting through it, like a child's drawing of an eye. She wiped it with her sleeve. The chalk smeared, but didn't vanish completely. That night, she heard it again, the thudding. But now it came from inside the hallway, just outside her apartment. 3 knocks, slow and heavy. Thud, thud, thud. Her throat tightened. Who is it? Nothing. She went to the peephole. The hallway beyond was empty, except for that same chalk symbol, drawn again, larger this time, right on her door. She froze. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She could feel someone standing on the other side, even though no one was visible. A warmth, a presence. Her phone buzzed in her hand, an unknown number flashing on the screen. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Eliza," a voice said, rough, almost like it was scraping against her eardrum. "Who is this?" The line crackled. "You shouldn't have opened the door last night." Then the call ended. Eliza stood there, phone trembling in her hand. "I didn't," she whispered. But deep down, she wasn't entirely sure she hadn't. The next morning, Eliza stood in front of apartment 3E. The door was dusty, the handle dull with neglect. A strip of yellowed tape hung where a nameplate should have been. She pressed her ear to the wood, half expecting to hear breathing again. Nothing. Her rational mind whispered, "Leave it alone." But the memory of that voice, "You shouldn't have opened the door," gnawed at her. She knocked, once. The sound echoed faintly through the hall. After a long pause came an answering sound, a single knock back. Her pulse fluttered. "Who's there?" she asked softly. No answer. She crouched and peered through the keyhole. Only darkness, but deep within it something shimmered like a reflection in water. Then a faint whisper rose, so close it might have been right inside her ear. "Don't look." She stumbled back, hitting the opposite wall. The lights flickered violently, buzzing like hornets. For a second she thought she saw something on the floor, a bare footprint, damp and facing her own door. Then the light steadied, and it was gone. That evening she called the landlord again. He sounded irritated this time. "I told you no one lives there. The last tenant—" He hesitated. "Moved out years ago. Please don't bother the other residents." "What other residents?" she asked. "I haven't seen anyone." The line went dead. As night fell, she tried not to look at the wall between her apartment and 3E. She turned up the television, kept every light on. Still, out of her corner of her eye, she saw something move, a faint shift in the wallpaper, as though someone were tracing fingers just beneath it. When she went to bed, she left the hallway light on. She woke hours later to its flickering glow and the sound of someone humming softly through the vent above her head. A woman's voice, low, tuneless, and impossibly sad. "He won't stop until you remember." Eliza sat frozen beneath her sheets, staring up at the vent. She didn't know what she was supposed to remember, but she knew, absolutely knew, that whoever was whispering through her walls was getting closer. By morning, the humming had stopped. The silence in its place felt heavier than noise. Eliza moved through her apartment slowly, every floorboard groaning underfoot, like the place resented being disturbed. She told herself she'd go out for breakfast, maybe talk to someone, anyone. But when she grabbed her coat, something slipped out of the pocket and landed on the floor. It was a photograph. Old, creased, the color faded to sepia. In it, she stood in front of a door that looked exactly like the one to apartment 3E. Her hair was longer, her smile uncertain. And next to her stood a man she didn't recognize. Tall, face slightly turned away, his hand resting on her shoulder. She didn't remember taking it, didn't remember him. Her phone buzzed suddenly, vibrating across the counter. An email notification from unknown@nulladress.net. Subject: "You dropped this." Attached was the same photo, but now the man's face was turned toward the camera, and it was Daniel. Her heart twisted painfully. It couldn't be. Daniel had never been here. She'd found this apartment after his accident. She zoomed in, trembling. His expression was wrong. His eyes looked darker, almost black, and his mouth. The phone screen flickered, glitching, and when it cleared, the man's face was gone entirely. That evening, she sat on the couch staring at the photo. She wanted to throw it away, burn it, but part of her couldn't stop looking, as if the picture might explain itself if she just stared long enough. Somewhere behind the wall came the sound of something dragging slowly across the floor. She rose, pressing her palm against the plaster. It felt warm. "Eliza!" The whisper was so close it trembled through her bones. "Do you see him yet?" She snatched her hand back. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply was soft. "You let him in once. Don't do it again." A moment later, from the hallway, came the unmistakable sound of someone knocking 3 times on her door. The knocks came again, louder this time. 3 deliberate strikes that made the hinges quiver. Thud, thud, thud. Eliza stood frozen, her pulse in her throat. "Who is it?" she managed. A pause, then a man's voice, muffled through the wood. "Liza, it's me." Daniel. The sound hit her like a dream breaking open. For a long second she couldn't move. Then she stumbled forward, hand trembling over the lock. "Daniel? How—" But she stopped. Something about the voice was off. The rhythm, the tone. It was close, but hollow, like a recording played through old speakers. She pressed her eye to the peephole. A shadow stood in the corridor. Too tall, too still. The overhead bulb flickered, and for a split second she saw a pale face leaning forward, the features blurred, as if the glass couldn't focus on them. "Eliza," the voice said again, softer now. "You opened the door before. You have to do it again." Her stomach turned to ice. "No, you're not him." Silence. Then, slowly, the handle began to turn on its own. She backed away, grabbed the nearest thing, a lamp, and hurled it toward the door. The crash broke the moment. The handle stopped moving. For nearly a minute she didn't breathe. Then came the sound of retreating footsteps. When she finally dared to look through the peephole again, the hallway was empty. Except something new on the floor. A folded scrap of paper slid neatly under her door. She hesitated, then picked it up. In the center, written in shaky, childlike handwriting, "He isn't dead if you keep remembering." She dropped the paper like it had burned her. That night, she dreamed of Daniel standing in the doorway of 3E. His skin was gray, his eyes black pits. He held out his hand and said, "You promised you'd wait." When she woke, the apartment smelled like damp soil, and the door to 3E was standing open wide. Eliza stood in the hallway, staring at the open door. A smell drifted out, dust, cold metal, and something sweet like rotting flowers. She whispered, "It's just wind," even though she could feel that no draft in the world would push a latch that heavy. The inside of 3E looked smaller than her own apartment, the light dimmer, as if the air itself swallowed brightness. The wallpaper was the same faded pattern, but bubbled and flaking, and in the far corner a small table sat covered with a sheet. On top of it lay a glass of water that hadn't evaporated, as if someone had just left the room. "Hello," she said. Her voice sounded wrong, flattened, like it didn't want to echo. She stepped over the threshold. The floor gave slightly under her weight, boards spongy with age. There were no boxes, no furniture except that covered table, no dust on the footprints she was leaving behind. In the kitchen, she found plates stacked neatly, each one rimmed with the same chalk symbol that had been drawn on her door. She should have run. Instead, she pulled the sheet from the table. Underneath was a mirror. The glass was old, warped, but her reflection looked too sharp. Behind her, in the mirror's depths, someone else stood in her apartment doorway, tall, indistinct, eyes bright as candle flame. When she turned around, the hallway was empty. A sound rose from somewhere below the floor, whispering, thousands of voices murmuring together like leaves rubbing against each other. She pressed her hands over her ears. The sound didn't stop. It was inside her head. Then one voice separated itself from the rest, a woman's tone she almost recognized. "You never left him. You never left this place." Her knees gave out. The air thickened, colors dimming until the room seemed to breathe around her. When she crawled back to her own doorway and slammed it shut behind her, the clock on the wall said 2:17 a.m., the same time she'd first heard the whispering on her first night. And now, in the mirror above her sink, the reflection of 3E's open door was still visible, even though hers was closed. Eliza covered the bathroom mirror with a towel before dawn. Every time she glanced at it, she saw that open door. Once, just before she draped the towel, she saw movement. Someone stepping out of 3E into her reflection, though her real hallway was still. She spent the morning convincing herself to act normal. Coffee, shower, phone call to her sister that she never finished dialing. The air in the apartment felt heavy, the kind of heaviness that presses against your ribs. By noon, she peeled the towel back an inch. Her reflection looked normal. Her face pale, eyes rimmed red. She leaned closer, whispering, "You're fine." Then her reflection smiled. She hadn't. The towel dropped from her hand. For a heartbeat, she couldn't move. Then the reflection raised its finger and pressed it to its lips. Shh. Eliza stumbled backward into the hall, heart slamming. The mirror still showed her reflection, perfectly still now, towel on the floor, everything as it should be. Her phone buzzed, a voicemail notification. She didn't remember hearing it ring. "Eliza, it's Daniel. You said you'd wait for me here. I'm downstairs." She stared at the screen. It was impossible. His number had been disconnected months ago, but the timestamp said 2 minutes ago. The intercom by the door crackled suddenly. A man's voice came through, faint but clear. "Liza, it's me. Please, open the door." Her stomach twisted. "Go away," she whispered. The voice came again, softer. "You're the one who called me." She looked at her phone. A call log blinked. Outgoing call. Daniel, 5:59 p.m. She hadn't touched it. A knock sounded from the door, 3 times, slow. The mirror in the bathroom vibrated with each strike, though no one had touched it. Cracks spidered across its surface, and through them she saw another Eliza, eyes wide, mouth open in a silent scream. The intercom hissed one last time, a whisper so faint she almost missed it. "You're standing where she died." Eliza didn't sleep that night. She sat in the living room with every light on, watching the shadows tremble whenever the wind touched the windows. At some point, she realized the refrigerator had gone quiet. The whole building had. It felt as if the world were holding its breath. A soft creak came from somewhere below her floorboards. She froze. Another. Then another, slow and even, like footsteps descending a staircase she couldn't see. She found herself walking into the hallway without meaning to, phone flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the dark. At the far end, beside the stairwell, she saw a door she hadn't noticed before. The paint around its frame was darker, edges curling as if it had been sealed for years. The knob resisted when she touched it, sticky with old varnish, but a steady tug loosened it. The smell that rose out was damp and cold, tinged with rust. A flight of wooden steps dropped away into darkness. "Just a maintenance room," she whispered. "Boilers, storage." Her voice came back to her, faintly warped. "Storage." Halfway down, the light from her phone flickered. In that momentary darkness, she heard whisperings again, echoing up from below. She thought she caught her own name threaded through the murmurs. When the beam steadied, she saw handprints along the wall, small, pale smudges in the dust, leading downward. They stopped at the bottom, in front of another door. On it, carved deep into the wood, was the same symbol she'd seen in chalk, a circle with a line through it, and beneath it, carved more crudely, a single word: remember. Her throat went dry. She reached out, traced the groove of the letters, and a faint vibration passed through her fingertip, as if the word were alive. The whisper swelled suddenly, louder, desperate. "Don't open it," they pleaded. Eliza stumbled back, hit the stairs, and scrambled upward. When she slammed the door behind her, something on the other side knocked once in reply. Slow, deliberate, patient. The next morning, the sun barely filtered through the grimy windows. Eliza tried to convince herself the basement had been a trick of shadow and fear, but the unease lingered like a shadow stretching across her chest. While unpacking some books, she noticed something strange: tiny scratches along the plaster near the living room corner. She crouched to examine them. At first, they looked like random marks from moving furniture. Then she saw letters emerging from the faint grooves. LOOKBEHIND. Her pulse quickened. She ran her fingers over the wall, cool plaster under her touch, but the letters were gone when she looked directly. Only the faintest scratch remained, almost like a memory the wall didn't want her to see. She took a hammer to the wall, determined to see what lay behind. Each tap echoed hollowly. Then, in the small cavity revealed beneath the peeling wallpaper, she found dozens of folded scraps of paper stuck into the space like secrets hidden for decades. She unfolded one. The handwriting was jagged, frantic. "He's not what he seems. Don't trust the eyes." Another. "I opened the door. I regret it. It remembers me." Her hands shook. Each paper seemed older than the last, yellowed, corners frayed, and some had dried smudges of something dark that looked like water or tears. Suddenly, a whisper rose from behind the wall itself, soft and rasping. "You're the one who let him in. Remember." Eliza dropped the papers. They fluttered to the floor. She wanted to run, to call the landlord, to scream, but the whisper followed her, circling, brushing the back of her neck. "Remember, before he comes." When she looked at the wall again, faint lines were etched into the plaster that hadn't been there before. This time, a name appeared: Eliza Carrington. Her breath caught. She didn't write that. She didn't carve that. The building felt suddenly alive, like it was watching, breathing, waiting. That evening, Eliza tried to pretend the wall incident hadn't happened. She lit candles, pulled a blanket over her legs, and attempted to read a book. But the light flickered and danced strangely, as if the flames themselves were hesitant. A shadow stretched across the hallway. It wasn't the soft, familiar darkness that the hall usually wore. It was sharp-edged, jagged, as if someone or something stood just out of reach of the candlelight. "Eliza," a voice murmured, low and hollow, slipping around the corners of the room. Her breath caught. She froze. The shadow moved, slowly, deliberately, stretching toward her apartment door, though the source remained invisible. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. She wanted to flee, to close every door, but her legs were heavy, almost cemented in place. Then she saw it. A thin, shifting figure pressed against the wall at the far end of the hallway. Not quite human, not quite solid. It leaned slightly, as though peering into her apartment, yet the hallway behind it remained empty. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it tilted its head, as though studying her, and elongated slightly, like shadow itself had taken a breath. Suddenly, her bedroom mirror reflected the hallway and the figure, but she wasn't standing in front of it anymore. Her stomach dropped. A whisper, layered and multiple this time, came from every corner. "You shouldn't have opened the door. You shouldn't have looked." Eliza stumbled back toward the living room, almost tripping over the papers she'd found in the wall. The shadows on the floor writhed and stretched toward her feet, as if the darkness itself was alive. The candles went out all at once, plunging the room into a suffocating black. Then a single, deliberate knock came from her bedroom door. Thud. Thud. She didn't move. Thud. The air around her felt charged, vibrating with a low, unspoken warning. "He's here." The next morning, the air was heavy with dampness. Eliza could still feel the presence from the previous night, though nothing seemed visible. She didn't want to go near the hallway, but her curiosity and a growing obsession pushed her forward. While cleaning behind the couch, she found something wedged between the floorboards. A small, leather-bound diary, brittle with age. The cover was embossed with a symbol she recognized instantly, the same circle with a line through it she had seen so many times now. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. The pages were filled with cramped handwriting, some entries legible, some scrawled so frantically she could barely make out the words. "I shouldn't have opened the door. I hear him whisper through the walls. He remembers me, even when I forget." Another page. "The shadows follow, always. They bend to him, but they are patient. They wait for the ones who remember." Eliza's hands shook as she turned the pages. There were photographs tucked inside, faces faded and distorted by time. Each person stared directly at the camera, eyes wide with terror. But the strange part was that many of them resembled her. Not closely, but enough to make her stomach twist. A final entry, the ink nearly washed away. "If you find this diary, don't think you are alone. You've been chosen. Remember him, or he will come for you." A sudden sound made her jump. The hallway creaked as though someone had stepped there, slow, soft, deliberate. She pressed the diary to her chest, her fingers digging into the leather. A whisper slithered from the vents above. "You shouldn't read that. You shouldn't know." The diary pages seemed to vibrate under her touch, as if alive. She dropped it. The book landed open, and the last page she hadn't yet seen bore a single, chilling message written in letters that were not entirely human. "He is waiting behind the wall." Eliza's heart slammed. She backed away, crashing into the sofa. The whispering grew louder, now layered and urgent, like the walls themselves were speaking directly to her mind. "Do you remember him? Do you remember?" Her eyes darted to the hallway. The shadows were moving again. Eliza didn't sleep that night. She sat cross-legged on the couch, diary open on her lap, lights on, every door locked. Yet even in the brightly lit room, shadows seemed to gather along the edges, sliding and twitching in ways no ordinary darkness should. Then she noticed something she hadn't before. A faint outline in the living room wall. Not a crack, not a door she could see, just a rectangle, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably a door that had been painted over. She pressed her hand to the wall. The plaster was warm under her touch, almost like it was breathing. "Eliza," the whisper came again, soft, coaxing, but impossible to locate. She turned, thinking someone had entered the room. No one. Her curiosity overpowered her fear. She fetched a small hammer and started tapping along the outline, plaster crumbling under the repeated strikes. Behind it, she discovered a hidden latch. Her heart thundering, she pulled. The wall gave way like a door. Behind it was a small room, no bigger than a closet. The air smelled thick, like earth and something metallic. Inside, the room was furnished with old items, a chair, a tiny table, and a stack of letters tied with a frayed ribbon. Dust hung in thick layers, disturbed only by the faint prints of hands that had clearly passed through here before. On the table lay a mirror, small and cracked. Eliza lifted it. Her reflection stared back, her eyes wide, pale, terrified. But behind her reflection, she glimpsed another figure, Daniel, or something that used to be him, standing just outside the tiny room, tall, rigid, staring with empty black eyes. A whisper rose from the corners of the room. "He's waiting for the one who remembers." The letters on the table were all addressed to her name, written in scrawled, trembling handwriting that was not hers, yet somehow familiar. The top one read, "Do not forget him. Do not open the door again. You already let him in once." Her hands shook. The air in the tiny room thickened, pressing against her chest. She felt it, a presence coiling, waiting, patient. The whispers became louder, insistent. "Do you remember him? Do you remember him?" Eliza pressed her hands over her ears, backing toward the wall. But when she turned, the door she had entered through was gone. Eliza's pulse hammered as she spun around. The small hidden room, moments ago confined and claustrophobic, now seemed impossibly larger. The walls stretched outward, pulsating faintly as if breathing. Dust motes floated in lazy circles, illuminated by some unseen light source. Her apartment, the one she had lived in for weeks, was gone. The door she had used to escape the hidden room had vanished. Instead, a narrow corridor stretched before her, lined with wallpaper that shifted subtly, patterns twisting into faces she almost recognized, hers, Daniel's, other strangers. Their eyes followed her, mournful, pleading. A whisper rose from the corridor, thick and layered. "You opened the door once. You opened the door once." Each repetition pressed against her mind. She stumbled forward, realizing the floorboards weren't her own. They felt warped, flexible, like walking on soft clay. At the corridor's end, a faint light glimmered. She approached, cautiously. The light came from a doorway partially open, but the room beyond didn't resemble any part of her apartment. Faded furniture, warped and twisted, crowded the room. On the far wall, mirrors reflected not her image, but fleeting, fragmented visions of another life, one where Daniel never died, one where she had never moved in. She blinked. When her eyes opened again, a shadow moved in the corner of the room, tall, still, human-shaped, but impossibly thin, stretched, dark as a storm cloud. It tilted its head slowly, watching her. Who are you?" Eliza whispered. The shadow's voice came, simultaneously hers and not hers. "You remember him. He remembers you." She wanted to scream, but no sound escaped her lips. Then the mirror shifted. Daniel's face appeared in each one, smiling faintly, too wide, too still. And behind him, Eliza's own face, twisted in silent terror. A chill rose from the floor. The whispering became a chorus, urgent, angry, echoing from every corner. "Do not forget. Do not forget. Do not forget." The corridor stretched further, impossibly long. Every step she took felt like she was walking deeper into something alive, a building that fed on her memories, reshaping itself around her fear. And somewhere behind her, she felt the faint, unmistakable press of a hand, warm, patient, waiting. Eliza pressed herself against the warped corridor wall, trying to steady her breath. The whispering wasn't confined to the shadows anymore. It came from everywhere, especially the vents above her head. A faint metallic hum rose, like distant machinery, then shaped itself into words. "You shouldn't have come here. You shouldn't have come here." The voice seemed to circle, bouncing from vent to vent, sometimes close enough to tickle her ear, other times distant, hollow, echoing down corridors that didn't exist before. She leaned closer to one vent, her ear nearly touching the metal grill. The voice became multiple at once, layered, overlapping, almost drowning out her own thoughts. "Remember him. Remember him. You opened the door." Her stomach twisted. She realized it wasn't just whispering. It was repeating events. She could hear herself moving through the apartment, picking up the diary, uncovering 3E, opening the hidden room. Every motion, every breath, captured and replayed in countless distorted echoes. A sudden thump from the vent made her stumble back. Something cold brushed her arm. "Eliza." The voice this time was distinct, singular. Daniel's, or what she wanted to be Daniel's. "You let me in once. Don't do it again." She looked up, terrified. The vent grill had shifted slightly, a thin shadow sliding just beneath it, like a finger moving on the other side. She wanted to scream. Her own voice refused to come. The vents rattled violently, whispering faster, louder, overwhelming. "Remember, remember, remember."
Her knees buckled. She collapsed to the floor, trying to cover her ears. The echoes didn't stop. They pressed against her skull, each whisper like a pin digging into her memory. And then, in the chaos of overlapping voices, a single clear phrase rang out, cutting through everything. He's behind the wall, waiting for the one who remembers. Eliza's eyes darted to the walls around her. They seemed alive, pulsing, almost breathing, closing in. The vents rattled one final time, and silence fell, so absolute it was suffocating. And somewhere in the dark, just beyond her vision, she felt it, a presence, waiting, patient. Eliza didn't sleep again that night. The apartment, or what she still insisted on calling her apartment, felt wrong in ways that went beyond shadows. Every surface seemed aware of her. Every wall, every floorboard, every mirror held memory, waiting to replay it. She lay on her back, staring at the ceiling, and that's when she noticed the scratches. Faint, jagged lines in the plaster, scratches that hadn't been there before. They formed letters, letters that shifted when she tried to focus on them. At first she thought it was her imagination, fatigue, anxiety, but then the scratches began to move. Tiny flecks of plaster fell as if something were clawing its way across the ceiling. "Eliza," whispered a voice, this time from above. Her breath caught. She scrambled to the edge of her bed, eyes fixed on the plaster. The scratches twisted into words she could finally read. "Look up. He is watching." Her heart hammered. She covered her head with a pillow, shaking, but the whisper came again, closer now, threaded with something dark, patient. "You opened the door once. You remember him. He waits." Gathering courage, she pulled the pillow away and lifted her eyes to the ceiling. The scratches had multiplied. They stretched across the room, forming patterns like veins or webs, as though the ceiling itself was alive. Then she saw movement. A shadow slid across the surface, slow, deliberate. It shifted, elongated, coalescing into the outline of a figure. Tall, thin, impossibly black, its head tilted, its eyes glimmering faintly in the plaster, watching. "Eliza," the voice hissed, now closer, harsher. "Do you remember?" The ceiling creaked violently. Small chunks of plaster fell around her, dust coating her hair and shoulders. She stumbled backward, tripping over the diary, the letters from the wall. A hand seemed to brush the edge of her face, cold, patient, insistent. Her mind screamed that no one was there, but her body felt it anyway. The whispers became layered again, urgent, insistent. "Remember, remember, remember." Eliza pressed herself against the floor, unable to move, unable to look. The ceiling scratches stretched toward her, like dark veins, and she realized she was trapped beneath it all. Above, the presence waited, patient, eternal.
Eliza woke, or thought she woke, to find her apartment different. The furniture wasn't where she had left it. The couch leaned against the wall at an impossible angle. The kitchen table had grown taller, its legs stretching like shadows. She blinked. The walls, they weren't straight. They curved inward, the corners bending subtly as if the room were inhaling her. Her pulse quickened. She touched the wall.
It felt soft, pliable, like wet clay. The wallpaper shimmered faintly under her fingers, the floral patterns moving, writhing like they were alive. A whisper floated from the far corner. "You opened the door once. You remember him. You cannot leave." She ran to her bedroom door. It swung open into the same corridor she had first discovered behind the hidden wall. But it wasn't her hallway anymore. This one stretched endlessly, lined with mirrors, each reflecting her or something like her, but slightly off. One had her face aged decades, another pale and lifeless, another twisted in fear. She tried the front door, locked. Again, but when she pressed her hand to it, it was warm, alive, like something breathing behind it. The doorknob trembled slightly, as if aware of her touch. Her apartment shifted again. The living room now contained the hidden room's mirror and table. The diary lay open on the couch, but the entries had changed. Words she hadn't read before appeared in jagged handwriting. "He is patient. He waits for the one who remembers. You are already chosen." She screamed, but the sound echoed oddly, stretched into multiple overlapping echoes that sounded like someone else screaming her name. From the vents above, whispers swirled. "You cannot leave. You cannot forget. He is inside." Eliza stumbled back against the wall and realized with a jolt that the wall itself had moved. The apartment had shifted. The living room now contained the hidden room's mirror and table. The diary lay open on the couch, but the entries had changed. Words she hadn't read before appeared in jagged handwriting. "He is patient. He waits for the one who remembers. You are already chosen." Eliza pressed her back against the nearest wall, trying to slow her racing heartbeat. The apartment no longer resembled a normal home. Every surface seemed to undulate slightly, as though it breathed. Even the plaster seemed soft under her fingertips, pulsing faintly, alive. Then she heard it. Murmurs, low at first, distant, like wind rustling through hollow pipes. She leaned closer, and the murmurs sharpened, forming words, countless voices layered together, overlapping, echoing in strange, impossible directions. "Remember, remember, you opened the door." The walls were speaking her name now, whispering softly, yet insistently, tugging at the edges of her mind. She pressed her hands over her ears, but it didn't stop. The plaster seemed to pulse under her fingers with every syllable. "Do not forget him. Do not forget." She stumbled backward, nearly falling over the couch. From somewhere deep inside the walls, a soft scraping sound began, a rhythm like fingers running across the surface from the inside. She pressed her ear against the wall. "We are patient. He is patient. You remember him." Her reflection in the warped mirrors that lined the hallway no longer moved in sync. She watched herself from behind, mouth open, hands shaking. Her reflection blinked, not with her. The murmurs grew louder, urgent, pressing into her mind. "He waits. He waits. He waits. Don't forget him. Don't forget him." A sudden cold rush swept through the corridor. The plaster beneath her fingers seemed to ripple, and for a fleeting moment she saw shapes, faces, hands, countless figures pressing against the inside of the walls, all staring at her with hollow eyes. Eliza fell to the floor, trembling. She didn't know if she was crying or shaking. The walls groaned as if breathing in unison, a slow, oppressive rhythm that mirrored her own heartbeat. And then, as if on cue, one whisper rose above the others, clearer than the others. "He is behind the wall. He is waiting. Remember before he comes." She curled into herself, pressing against the cold floor, realizing with a terrifying clarity, the apartment wasn't just haunted, it was alive, and it was hungry for her memory. Eliza sat on the floor, hugging her knees, every nerve taut with dread. The apartment had fallen into a strange, heavy silence, except for the occasional groan of the walls, reminding her that it was still alive, still waiting. Her gaze drifted to the mirrors lining the warped hallway. At first, they reflected her exactly as she was, pale, trembling, wide-eyed. But slowly, one by one, the reflections began to shift. She froze. In the nearest mirror, her reflection remained still, but behind her, a figure loomed, tall, thin, impossibly black, with eyes that glimmered faintly like candle flames. She spun around. Nothing. Only the warped hallway, stretching impossibly far. The figure moved closer in the mirror, its head tilted, a slow, deliberate motion. Its hand lifted, pressing against the glass from the inside. Eliza's pulse thundered. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. "Eliza," a voice hissed from somewhere deep inside the apartment. The reflection spoke again, lips moving, though the real figure didn't exist. "You opened the door once. You remember him. You cannot leave." Eliza pressed a hand to the mirror. Her reflection mimicked the movement, but then it didn't. Her reflection's eyes were black, and its mouth twisted into a silent scream. Other mirrors shifted similarly. Some showed her apartment as it once was, normal and mundane. Others showed it distorted, elongated, shadows crawling along the walls, and in every single reflection that figure appeared, lurking just behind her. A whisper slithered from the vents above. "Do you remember him? He waits for the one who remembers." Eliza stepped back, nearly tripping over the diary. Every mirror now reflected not just the hallway, but the hidden room, the basement, the corridor behind 3E, all layered into impossible, overlapping realities. The figure in the mirror raised its hand again, and this time it seemed to push forward, toward her, through the glass, through reality itself. Eliza stumbled backward, falling into the wall. She pressed her ear to it. "He is patient, but he remembers you." And she realized with bone-deep terror that her own reflection was no longer hers alone. Eliza didn't sleep. She paced the warped apartment, every step echoing unnaturally, mirrors reflecting impossible corridors she didn't remember. The diary lay open on the couch, its pages filled with handwriting that seemed to shift whenever she glanced at it. And then she heard it, the basement. At first, it was faint, a low, persistent hum, like the building's heartbeat. Then, beneath it, whispers began, layered, insistent, calling her name. "Eliza, Eliza, you opened the door."
Her knees buckled. The voice sounded familiar, impossibly so. Daniel's, or the memory of him, but distorted, stretched, slipping at the edges. She forced herself toward the stairwell. The basement door loomed ahead, paint peeling, handle worn. She tried to ignore it, tried to convince herself it was just the old building settling, but the whispers grew louder with each step. Do you remember? Do you remember him? Her hand touched the cold handle. A shiver ran up her spine. The whispers surged, almost screaming now, layered over one another. Faces pressed against the inside of the walls, eyes wide, mouths open, mouths whispering her name. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the door open. The stairs descended into darkness, impossibly long. The air smelled of damp earth, rust, and something sweet, decaying. From the depths came a single distinct voice, calm and patient. You opened the door once. You cannot leave. He waits. She descended slowly, each step creaking, echoing into the black void below. The whispers multiplied, moving through the vents, the cracks, the walls themselves, wrapping around her mind like threads. Halfway down, she saw it, a faint light at the bottom, flickering like a candle. The shadowy outline of a figure stood there, impossibly tall, still. Its black eyes glimmered, fixed on her. The whispers coalesced into one final urgent warning. Remember, or he comes for you. Eliza's hand shook as she reached the last step. The basement stretched farther than it should. The floorboards warped, endless, and beneath it all, she felt it, the presence she had been avoiding since the first night. Patient, waiting, insistent. She realized with bone-deep terror that this was not just a building. It was alive, and she had already crossed the threshold. Eliza's hands trembled as she fumbled for a candle in the corner of the basement. The flickering flame barely pierced the blackness, casting long, twisted shadows that clung to the walls like living things. Every movement of the flame distorted the shadows, making them writhe and stretch, and for a moment she thought she saw figures moving in the corners, tall, thin, watching. A whisper rose, barely audible over the low hum of the basement. You opened the door. You remember him. Her pulse thumped in her ears. She lit another candle, then another, trying to create a circle of light around herself. The flames danced across the floorboards, revealing more of the basement. Rusted pipes twisted overhead, dripping faint moisture. Old boxes lined the walls, their contents spilling onto the floor. Photographs, letters, even small toys that looked decades old. The air smelled damp and metallic, and her breath came in ragged bursts. Every candle she lit revealed something new, a shadow where there had been none before, a whisper that hadn't been there a second ago. She approached a small table at the far end of the room, where another mirror leaned against the wall. Her reflection shimmered strangely in the candlelight, pale, elongated, eyes dark and hollow. Behind her reflection she saw movement, a tall, thin figure, impossibly still, watching her. "Eliza," a voice hissed from somewhere behind the table. The candlelight flickered, and she thought she heard the scraping of nails across wood, slow and deliberate. "You shouldn't be here. You remember him. You cannot leave." She took a step back. The shadows in the basement shifted, stretching toward her.
The mirrors reflected more than her own image now. Doorways that didn't exist, staircases descending into impossibility, rooms stacked within rooms, and in each reflection that same figure waited, patient. The whispers coalesced into one voice, calm and intimate. He is behind the wall. He is waiting for the one who remembers. Her candle flickered violently, the flame threatening to go out, and she reached out, desperate to steady it, and in that instant the basement seemed to exhale, a cold, wet gust that smelled of earth and decay. The figure in the mirrors leaned closer, impossibly tall, stretching as though the reflection itself could escape into her world. Her heart hammered. She realized she was no longer standing in a basement. She was inside the memory itself, a place where time, walls, and shadow obeyed something other than reality. The candle sputtered. Shadows rushed toward her from all sides, and somewhere deep in the darkness she heard the patient, chilling certainty of the figure's voice. Do you remember him, or will you forget, as they always do? Eliza's candle flickered, casting her long shadow across the warped floor. She stepped toward what looked like a staircase in the corner of the basement, a stairway that had not been there before. The wood creaked under her weight, echoing like a groan. She climbed slowly. Each step seemed longer than the last, stretching into darkness. The walls closed in subtly, bending toward her, and the shadows along the stairs shifted as if alive. Whispers slithered around her, repeating fragments of memories she didn't fully recognize. You opened the door. You remember him. He waits. Halfway up, she noticed something impossible. The stair treads were moving beneath her feet, sliding downward while she climbed upward. Her pulse raced. Panic gripped her, but her feet kept moving, following the rhythm of the stairs. She glanced back. The basement floor was gone. The stairs descended and ascended at once, folding in themselves like a living coil. Shadows pooled in the corners, thickening, stretching toward her. She could feel eyes pressing against her from the darkness, patient and hungry. At the top, a faint light flickered. She reached for it, a door frame. But as her hand touched the wood, it stretched impossibly away. The stairwell beneath her now extended endlessly, vanishing into a black void. Every attempt to move forward or back met resistance, as though the space itself refused her passage. The whispers grew urgent, layered, pressing against her mind. Do not forget him. Do not leave. Do not open the door again. Then she noticed movement along the stairs themselves. Small, pale hands pressed against the edges of the wood, clawing, leaving faint scratches. Faces appeared fleetingly in the shadows, distorted, screaming silently. They looked familiar, too familiar. Eliza stumbled, nearly falling, and caught herself on the railing, except the railing was warm and pulsing under her hand. The stairwell groaned, vibrating with a low hum, and from the top came a whisper, clearer than all the others. He is behind the wall. He is patient, and he remembers you. She froze, unable to move. The stairs stretched, bent and twisted further into impossibility, leaving her suspended between floors, caught in the living architecture of the apartment that was no longer real. Eliza's legs trembled as she stumbled from the twisted stairwell into a room that hadn't existed moments before. The walls were covered in mirrors of every size, some cracked, some warped. Each reflection showed her slightly wrong, pale, older, twisted by fear. And behind her, in every reflection, was the tall black figure, watching patiently. The air was thick, smelling of earth, metal, and old paper. The whispers from the vents and walls merged into a chorus of memory, echoing every moment she'd spent in the building. Opening 3E, finding the diary, seeing the hidden room, the basement stairs. Each memory played like a recording, faster, louder, overlapping, until it pressed into her skull. The room seemed to expand and contract. One second it was small, suffocating. The next it stretched endlessly, mirrors receding into impossibility. Each reflection now had its own whispers, repeating fragments. Do you remember him, or will you forget? He waits. You opened the door once. She wanted to run, but the floor felt uneven, shifting beneath her feet. The shadows in the mirrors reached out, brushing her hands and arms as if trying to pull her inside. A faint candlelight flickered in the far corner of the room. Eliza crept toward it, desperate for some anchor to reality. But as she approached, the figure appeared in the light, not in a mirror this time, but in the room itself. Tall, impossibly thin, eyes black and patient. It didn't move, but she could feel its gaze pressing into her mind. Do you remember him? It whispered in her thoughts, not aloud. Do you remember what you did? Her own reflection in a mirror behind the figure began to smile, a cruel, twisted version of her own face, echoing a memory she didn't fully understand. Eliza realized then, with bone-deep horror, that the room wasn't just observing her. It was judging, waiting for her to act, for her memory to bend and break. And somewhere in the whispers, she heard it clearly. He is behind the wall. He has always been waiting. Eliza backed away from the mirrors, her chest tight, every muscle trembling. The room itself seemed to pulse, expanding and contracting in unnatural rhythm. Shadows from the mirrors stretched along the walls, twisting and crawling like living fingers. At the far end, a narrow slit of darkness appeared, a corridor that hadn't existed before. It was just wide enough for her to step through, and a cold draft flowed from it, smelling of earth and rust. Something tugged at her mind, almost magnetic in its insistence. Go through it. She hesitated, heart pounding. The whispers pressed against her skull, layered voices overlapping, repeating the same warning over and over. Do not forget him. Do not leave. You opened the door once. He waits. The corridor walls were close, textured, as if made of old, rough plaster. As she stepped inside, the whispers became clearer, sharper, threading through her mind like barbed wire. Do you remember him? He is patient. He remembers you. You cannot leave. The corridor narrowed endlessly. Each step she took seemed to lengthen, the walls bending subtly around her, closing in, then pulling apart, as if the space itself were alive. Mirrors appeared along the walls, reflecting not just her image, but memories, her apartment, the hidden room, the basement stairs, the diary, the scratches in the ceiling. Each memory played like a recording, faster, louder, overlapping, until it pressed into her skull. The corridor twisted again. The floor beneath her seemed to ripple, as if she were walking on water, and a faint, almost imperceptible hum rose from below. A whisper slithered from behind the walls. He waits. He waits. He waits. Suddenly, a hand reached out from the shadow at the end of the corridor, not solid, almost vaporous, but real enough to make her recoil. The whispers turned urgent, frantic. Do you remember, or will you forget, as they always do? Her candlelight flickered violently, nearly extinguishing, and in that brief darkness she saw the corridor stretch farther than any normal building should allow, twisting back on itself, folding, swallowing itself. She realized with utter terror there was no way out, and somewhere beyond the folds of impossibility, the patient presence waited, always waiting, behind a wall she hadn't yet discovered. Eliza's candle guttered, throwing flickering light across the impossibly long corridor. Every step she took seemed amplified, echoing back at her from all directions. But it wasn't just her steps. Another set followed, soft, deliberate, perfectly timed, always a half beat behind her. She froze. The corridor stretched before her, endless, twisting impossibly. Shadows clung to the walls, quivering like living things. "Do you remember him?" The whisper came again, layered, threading through her thoughts. Her pulse thundered. She turned sharply, but the corridor behind her was empty, or at least it seemed empty. She continued walking, forcing herself forward. Every step she took triggered a reflection in the mirrors lining the walls. Her image, or what looked like her, lagged, twisted, smiling faintly. Behind that reflection, the tall figure appeared, its black eyes fixed, patient, unmoving. The echoes of steps grew louder, multiplying. From every reflection, every shadow, every crack in the wall, the sound of someone or something following her pressed against her mind. He waits, he remembers you. Eliza stumbled. She pressed a hand against the nearest wall for support. It was soft, almost pulsing, like the corridor itself was alive. A whisper slithered directly into her ear, not from outside, but inside her mind. You cannot leave. You opened the door once. You remember him. Her candle flickered out. Darkness swallowed the corridor. Her own breathing sounded loud, harsh, frantic. Then she felt it. A presence just behind her, warm, patient, impossibly close. A single voice rose above the chorus of whispers, calm, intimate, almost tender. Do you remember him, or will you forget? The corridor stretched further, folding in impossible angles, shadows crawling toward her feet. She realized with a cold, sinking certainty that the apartment wasn't just alive, it was hunting her. Eliza pressed herself against the corridor wall, chest heaving. The echoes of footsteps behind her had faded, but the whispers persisted, layering themselves over her thoughts. She could feel the apartment shifting, subtly, almost imperceptibly, like a living creature exhaling. Then she noticed it. The wall beneath her hand quivered, not a vibration from the building settling, but a slow, deliberate pulse, as if the plaster itself was breathing. She froze, fingertips pressed against it. Each inhale of the wall made her pulse throb. Each exhale seemed to tug at her mind. Do you remember him? The whisper came, clearer this time, threaded with something ancient, patient, terrifying. Eliza's hand slid along the wall. The surface felt warm now, pliable, like soft clay. The faint scratches she had seen before shifted beneath her fingers, forming letters, words she couldn't fully read without moving closer. The wall pulsed again, and she realized the words were forming. He is behind the wall. You remember. He waits. Panic clawed at her throat. She tried to pull away, but the wall seemed to cling, softening and contracting slightly, holding her like a living thing. The mirrors along the corridor reflected the movement, the warping, the pulse, though the reflections stretched impossibly, showing rooms behind walls she didn't know existed. The whispers swelled, rising to a deafening crescendo. You open the door. You cannot leave. He is patient. He is waiting. Eliza fell to her knees. The corridor around her rippled, bending like liquid, folding inward and outward simultaneously. She could hear the whispers vibrating through the walls themselves, pressing into her skull. Do not forget him. Do not forget him. Do not forget. And in that moment, as the wall pulsed beneath her, she understood the terrifying truth. She was no longer merely trapped inside a building. She was trapped inside its memory, its consciousness, and the patient presence beyond the walls knew exactly who she was. Eliza stumbled backward from the breathing wall, gasping for air. Her legs wobbled as she tried to steady herself. The corridor had shifted again, narrowing, stretching, the mirrors along its walls reflecting angles that shouldn't exist. And then she saw it. A door, pale, wooden, unmarked. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Her pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed at her not to approach, but something pulled her forward. A magnetic insistence threaded through her mind. Open it. You opened the door once. You remember him. The whisper slithered inside her skull. She froze. The door seemed normal at first glance, but the longer she stared, the more it appeared alive. The wood rippled subtly, the grain moving like veins. A faint pulse, like a heartbeat, resonated through the frame. Her hand hovered over the knob. The whispers grew urgent. Do not forget him. Do not open it again. He waits. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to touch it. The wood was warm, soft, pliable. The surface pulsed beneath her fingers, almost breathing. She tried to pull her hand back. It wouldn't release her. The candlelight flickered violently. Shadows poured from the edges of the door, crawling across the floor like liquid ink. Mirrors along the corridor reflected not the door she touched, but another version, twisted, gaping open into a dark void filled with impossible stairways and shadowy figures. A voice rose from the darkness behind the door, calm, patient, and intimate. You remember him. You opened the door. Now he waits for the one who remembers. Eliza's knees buckled. She pressed herself against the wall, her mind screaming. The door seemed to grow taller, stretching into the corridor's impossible ceiling. And through the warped wood, she felt it, the patient presence just beyond, waiting for her memory to falter, waiting to consume her if she forgot. The whispers intensified, no longer separate from the air or the walls. They were inside her head, layered, insistent. Do not forget. He is patient. He is waiting. Remember him before he comes. Eliza realized with a crushing clarity that this was no ordinary door. It wasn't meant to open. It was a threshold, a lure, a trap. And she had already crossed the first step. Eliza sank to the floor, pressing her back against the corridor wall. The door that hadn't existed before loomed to her right, pulsating subtly, almost alive. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. The apartment had folded in on itself again, corridors twisting impossibly. Then she heard it, a voice, low and patient, echoing up from the depths beneath her feet. Eliza. Her pulse slammed in her ears. The voice was familiar, impossibly so, like Daniel, but distorted, layered with something older, darker, patient. You opened the door once. You remember him. You cannot leave. The floorboards beneath her trembled, soft, pliable. Shadows pooled beneath the baseboards, twisting, crawling toward her. The whispers from the vents and walls converged, layering into a chorus of memory and warning. Do not forget him. Do not leave. He waits. The voice beneath her rose slightly, more insistent, almost intimate. He is behind the wall. He waits for the one who remembers. Do you remember him? Her hands shook as she pressed them against the floor. Every echo of her own heartbeat seemed to bounce back from below, multiplied, distorted. The floor itself rippled, and in the brief flicker of candlelight, she saw the shadows of hands pressing up from beneath the boards, long, thin, impossibly patient. She scrambled backward, knocking over the candle. Darkness swallowed the corridor. The whispers intensified, threading through her mind, pressing at the edges of her memory. Remember, or he comes for you. The presence beneath the floor waited, patient, eternal, and somewhere behind the mirrored walls, the tall black figure shifted slightly, tilting his head, watching. Eliza realized with horror she had been lured into a place that was alive, patient, and infinite, and now it wanted her memory, every fragment of it. She pressed herself against the wall, trembling, listening. The whispers didn't stop. Do you remember him? She had no answer. Eliza forced herself to stand, hands trembling, candle long extinguished. The corridor stretched before her, impossibly long, bending and twisting as though the apartment itself were breathing. Mirrors lined the walls, reflecting not just her image, but memories she hadn't lived or had forgotten, layered over one another. With every step, the floor groaned, the walls pulsed, and shadows clung to the edges of the corridor, stretching unnaturally toward her. Whispers rose from the vents, the walls, beneath the floorboards, layered, urgent, insistent. Do not forget him. You opened the door once. He waits for the one who remembers. Eliza's reflection in the mirrors began to act independently. She blinked. One reflection raised a hand she had not lifted. Another smiled when she did not. Behind each reflection, the tall black figure appeared, patient, unblinking, impossibly still. She tried to run, but the corridor bent and twisted beneath her feet. Steps she took forward seemed to place her back at the same spot. Every turn led her back to the same mirrors, the same shadows, the same whispers. Do you remember him, or will you forget? The walls rippled faintly as if alive, closing and expanding, breathing in rhythm with her own terrified heartbeat. The floor vibrated softly beneath her, a low pulse like a warning, like a heartbeat that belonged to the building itself. Eliza pressed herself against a wall, gasping. The corridor seemed infinite, folding upon itself, stretching impossibly. A door appeared at the far end, unmarked, familiar. She knew, intellectually, viscerally, that opening it would change everything. "He is behind the wall. He is patient, and he remembers you," whispered the layered voices, almost inside her mind now, not around her. Her legs shook. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet the hallway held her, patient, alive, infinite. Shadows crept at her feet, mirrors multiplied, whispers thickened, and she realized with bone-deep terror that the apartment was no longer just a place. It was her memory, her fear, and it had trapped her entirely. Eliza's legs gave out, and she collapsed to the warped floor of the endless corridor. The whispers had grown sharper, closer, threading through her thoughts like barbed wire. At first, they were low murmurs, warnings, fragments, teasing her memory. Then they became screams. "Do you remember him? He waits. You opened the door. Do not forget him." The voices were layered, overlapping, echoing in every direction. Her own voice joined them, though she had not spoken, screaming her name, accusing her of forgetting. The mirrors along the corridor fractured further under the pressure of the sound, each reflection multiplying the figure she had feared, each one stretching taller, thinner, more impossible. Shadows erupted along the walls, crawling like liquid, flowing under her hands and feet, pressing against her, suffocating her. The floor pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't her own. She felt the building bending, breathing, alive. The walls seemed to lean toward her, watching, listening, judging. From somewhere deep behind the mirrored walls, a single voice rose above the chaos, calm, patient, intimate. "He is behind the wall. He is patient, and he remembers you." Eliza covered her ears, shaking, but the sound penetrated her mind. Her own memories twisted, folding upon themselves, flashing in fragments. Daniel, the hidden room, the basement, the diary, the scratches in the ceiling. Each memory was a thread in the apartment's consciousness, woven into its hunger. The corridor stretched endlessly, walls rippling, mirrors multiplying, shadows reaching. A cold pressure pressed against her shoulder, invisible but insistent. She flinched, trembling, knowing with certainty that the patient presence was there, waiting for her to falter. The whispers escalated further, voices screaming her name, accusing, commanding, layering into a maddening chorus. "Remember! Remember! Remember!" Eliza's knees buckled. She realized the apartment had consumed all familiar space, all sense of time. She was trapped in its memory, hunted by its patient shadow, chased by echoes of herself, facing a presence that had waited for her, specifically. And somewhere behind the warped walls, the tall black figure moved ever so slightly, tilting its head, watching. Eliza pressed herself against the wall, trembling, trying to catch her breath. The corridor stretched endlessly, mirrors multiplying her terror, shadows pressing closer with each heartbeat. But beneath the fear, a thought surfaced. Daniel. Not just the figure she remembered, the friend, the lover, the shadow of the past, but something else, something trapped, something that had been waiting, patient, behind the hidden door she had opened so long ago. The whispers softened slightly, threaded now with melancholy.
Do you remember him? Do you remember what you did? Images flickered in the mirrors. Daniel as he had been, laughing softly, holding a candle, reaching for her hand. Then darker, distorted visions. Him pale, still, eyes hollow, pressing against the walls of a space that seemed to fold in on itself. Eliza's own reflection flinched in terror. She realized with a sick twist in her stomach that the apartment remembered Daniel too. The hidden room, the basement, the mirrors, even the breathing walls, they were all connected to him, tied to her memory of him, to her guilt. He waits. You remember. He remembers. The whispers layered themselves over her thoughts, pulling fragments of memory from her mind. The diary, the scratches on the ceiling, the shadow behind her reflection. Every memory of Daniel, every detail she had buried, had been captured by this living apartment, and now it fed the patient presence, keeping it alive. A mirror shimmered. Daniel's figure appeared inside it, pale, impossibly thin, hollow-eyed. He raised a hand toward her, not threatening, not angry, just waiting. The wall behind her pulsed, almost in time with her own heartbeat. The whispers returned, insistent, threaded with menace. You opened the door. You remember him. You cannot leave, and he waits. Eliza realized she had become part of the apartment's memory. Daniel's presence, twisted and patient, had been trapped here all along, and now it was tied to her. Every step, every thought, every recollection strengthened it. She pressed her forehead to the wall, breathing shallow, whispering to herself, I remember, I remember, I remember him. But the corridor stretched, shadows crept, the mirrors multiplied, and somewhere deep inside the building, the patient figure watched, waiting, eternal. Eliza stumbled forward through the endlessly twisting corridor, her mind fraying with every echo of whispers and reflections. The mirrors along the walls multiplied the shadows, stretching them long and thin, each one writhing, crawling, clawing at impossible angles. She tried to step carefully, but no matter where she went, the shadows followed. They slipped along the walls, pooling beneath her feet, climbing the corners, flowing along the ceiling like liquid darkness. Every movement she made seemed mirrored by a creeping presence that was faster, smarter, patient. You remember him? Do you remember what you did? The whisper curled through her mind, inside her skull, almost a physical touch. She turned, trying to see the source, but the corridor reflected infinite paths, impossible angles, and each reflection had the shadows, multiplying, growing, pressing closer. Her own reflection stretched along the wall in a grotesque imitation of herself, but behind it another figure moved independently, taller, thinner, featureless, patient. It didn't rush, it didn't chase, but it followed, step for step, always just behind, always watching. He waits. He is patient. He remembers you. The walls rippled subtly, pulsing like a heartbeat in rhythm with her own terror. The shadows along the floor and walls leaned closer, brushing her legs, her arms, wrapping tendrils of darkness around her. She stumbled, crying out, but the echoes didn't match her voice. They multiplied it, distorted it,
layered it into the chorus of screams, whispers, and patient voices that filled the corridor. Every reflection in the mirror showed her surrounded, suffocated by shadows, yet she knew she was alone, or at least physically alone. The corridor had become a trap, a living, breathing entity feeding on her fear and memory, and the shadows were its agents, patient, waiting, endless. Eliza pressed her forehead to the wall, sobbing, whispering into the darkness, "I remember, I remember, I remember him." But the shadows did not stop. They pressed closer, patient, relentless, endless.
And behind the mirrored walls, the tall black figure watched, waiting for her to falter.
Eliza sank to the floor, trembling, her hands covering her ears. The shadows that had followed her now clung to the edges of the mirrors along the corridor, stretching impossibly long, pressing closer with every heartbeat. The whispers and echoes of memory surged around her, layered and chaotic. Then she heard it, a scream, not from her own throat, not from the shadows, but from the mirrors themselves. One mirror, cracked and warped, suddenly vibrated violently. The surface rippled like water, and a face appeared, not hers, but hers distorted, screaming silently, lips moving without sound. "Do you remember him?" The whisper became a roar, echoing inside her mind. Other mirrors followed, each one bending, distorting, each reflection screaming silently, their mouths opening impossibly wide, eyes blackened, teeth jagged, faces twisted with fear and accusation. Eliza tried to look away, but her own reflection appeared in every surface, mimicking her terror, exaggerating it, multiplying it. Behind her mirrored self, the tall black figure pressed closer, patient, unmoving, tilting its head. "You opened the door. You remember him. You cannot leave. He waits." The walls pulsed, the floor vibrated, and the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly. She stumbled backward, knocking over the remains of her candles, plunging the space into flickering shadows. The mirror screamed again, this time louder, overlapping her thoughts, her memories. Every fragment of Daniel, every hidden corridor, every whispered warning replayed violently in her mind. Eliza's knees buckled. She pressed her face to the floor, sobbing, whispering over and over, "I remember, I remember, I remember him." But the mirrors did not stop. Their silent screams, the warped reflections, and the patient waiting presence beyond the walls reminded her of the horrifying truth. She was trapped, consumed by a building alive with memory, and nothing, no scream, no prayer, would save her from the one who waited behind the walls. Eliza struggled to her feet, trembling. The corridor stretched endlessly, mirrors screaming silently around her, shadows crawling along every wall and ceiling. And yet, despite the chaos, a force pulled her forward, magnetic, subtle, insistent. It was the hidden room. Her body moved almost against her will. Each step toward the room made the corridor twist and bend in impossible ways. The whispers followed, layered, insistent. "You opened the door. You remember him. He waits." The floor beneath her shifted subtly, pulsing with each heartbeat, and the walls seemed to lean toward her, guiding her toward a door she once feared. The mirrors along the corridor reflected the hidden room behind her in impossible angles, showing it stretching, folding, alive. Eliza's mind screamed at her to turn back, to run, but the pull was irresistible. Shadows pressed close, climbing along her legs, whispering threats in her ear. The air grew thick, humid, smelling of old paper, damp earth, and something faintly metallic. "Do you remember him? Do you remember what you did?" Her legs shook, but she moved forward, compelled. The corridor stretched and narrowed, folding over itself. The hidden room appeared faintly at the end, its door warped, its surface pulsating subtly. Every instinct told her it was alive, conscious, waiting for her. The whispers rose into a chorus, echoing through the walls and floor. "Come in. He has waited. He remembers you." Eliza realized the horrifying truth. She was no longer choosing to enter. The hidden room was pulling her inside, folding her memory and fear into itself, and the patient presence beyond the walls was ready. Eliza's hand trembled. She pushed the warped door open. The hidden room exhaled a faint, damp breath, the air thick with dust, shadows, and a faint metallic tang. The walls pulsed softly, almost like a heartbeat, and the mirrors lining the corridor outside reflected impossibly long, twisted versions of herself disappearing into the darkness. Inside, the room was empty, or so it seemed, but the presence was there, patient, immense, though impossible to define, and utterly silent. It didn't move, yet its awareness pressed against her mind, patient and eternal. "You opened the door." The whisper came from everywhere and nowhere, inside her skull, threading through every thought, memory, and fear. "You remember him. You remember what you did. You cannot leave." Shadows in the corners coalesced into shapes, tall, thin, black, their eyes faintly glimmering. They did not approach, but observed, patient, reflecting the presence's hunger. Every whisper she had heard, every scream from the mirrors, every shadow along the walls, they were all extensions of this waiting consciousness. Eliza's body shook. She tried to retreat, but the door behind her had vanished. The corridor outside had folded into impossible angles. She was trapped inside this room, inside its memory, inside its patient awareness. Her mind flashed with every memory tied to Daniel, to the hidden room, to the first time she had opened the door. Every fragment of guilt, fear, and love was being absorbed by the presence, feeding it, making it stronger, more patient, eternal. "Do you remember him?" The voice was calm, intimate, terrifying, not asking, demanding. She realized she could not lie, could not forget. "He waits for the one who remembers. You cannot leave. You belong to this place now." The room pulsed again, the mirrors reflecting infinite versions of herself, all trapped, all patient, all terrified. Shadows reached from the corners, stretching impossibly long, brushing her arms, legs, pressing against her skin like living fingers. Eliza sank to the floor, trembling, whispering, "I remember, I remember, I remember him." And somewhere in the folds of impossible space, the patient presence tilted its head, observing, waiting, eternal, satisfied with her acknowledgement. Eliza sank to her knees,
Her trembling hands pressed against the floor of the hidden room. The walls pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Or was it the heartbeat of the apartment itself? The air grew thick, suffocating, vibrating with the patient presence's awareness. Then the room shifted. The walls folded inward, stretching and twisting impossibly. The corners curled, overlapping themselves, the ceiling bending down toward her. The mirrors on the walls multiplied infinitely, reflecting versions of herself that moved independently, screaming silently, their shadows creeping along the warped floor. Do you remember him? Do you remember what you did? The whispers twisted her memories, pulling fragments of Daniel, the hidden room, the basement, the diary into a chaotic loop. Each memory became a thread in the apartment's consciousness, weaving her fear, her guilt, and her terror into its patient, eternal awareness. Eliza tried to stand. She stumbled. The floor stretched ahead, folding into itself, a corridor of impossible angles. Shadows flowed along the warped walls, climbing, curling, reaching, patient and deliberate. The hidden room no longer seemed like a room. It was a nexus, a center of impossible geometry, a folding space alive with memory and observation. The patient presence moved in the folds of space, stretching, bending reality around her, pulling her toward it. Mirrors along the warped walls reflected the impossible corridors behind her, doors that never existed, stairways folding into darkness, shadows climbing walls like liquid. He waits. He is patient. He remembers you. Eliza pressed her face to the warped floor, whispering, trembling, trying to anchor herself. I remember, I remember, I remember him. And somewhere in the folds of impossible space, the patient presence tilted its head, observing, waiting, eternal, satisfied with her acknowledgement. Eliza sank to her knees, her trembling hands pressed against the floor of the hidden room. The walls pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat, or was it the heartbeat of the apartment itself? The air grew thick, suffocating, vibrating with the patient presence's awareness. Then the room shifted. The walls folded inward, stretching and twisting impossibly. The corners curled, overlapping themselves, the ceiling bending down toward her. The floor rippled like water, sending her hands sliding along its warped surface. Mirrors on the walls multiplied infinitely, reflecting versions of herself that moved independently, screaming silently, their shadows creeping along the warped floor. Do you remember him? Do you remember what you did? The whispers twisted her memories, pulling fragments of Daniel, the hidden room, the basement, the diary into a chaotic loop. Each memory became a thread in the apartment's consciousness, weaving her fear, her guilt, and her terror into its patient, eternal awareness. She tried to stand. She stumbled. The floor stretched ahead, folding into itself, a corridor of impossible angles. Shadows flowed along the warped walls, climbing, curling, reaching, patient and deliberate. The hidden room no longer seemed like a room. It was a nexus, a center of impossible geometry, a folding space alive with memory and observation. The patient presence moved in the folds of space, stretching, bending reality around her, pulling her toward it. Mirrors along the warped walls reflected the impossible corridors behind her.
doors that never existed, stairways folding into darkness, shadows climbing walls like liquid. It waits. It is patient. It remembers you. Eliza pressed her face to the warped floor, whispering, trembling, trying to anchor herself. I remember him. But the folding space continued. Walls twisted, floors bent, ceilings curved. The mirrors multiplied, shadows stretched, and the patient presence observed, eternal, infinite, consuming her memories, folding them into itself. She realized with bone-deep horror, she was no longer merely trapped. She had become part of the apartment itself, a thread in its consciousness, observed, recorded, folded, and remembered by the patient presence that had waited for her all along.